All right, so this is a video to go through the final project for the first quarter, the final MCDM, multi-criteria decision-making project. So I'm going to go through and make a decision for myself. And before I get started, I want to open up the multi-criteria decision-making steps so that I can remember what to do. So I've opened it up actually in a new window here so I can make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to follow along with those steps as I'm going through the project. So the first step is to decide what you're going to do for your problem. The problem I've decided to do for this example is which amusement park to go visit. And so I've chosen 3 different amusement parks that I'd like to go see. I've chosen Cedar Point, Michigan's Adventure, and Kings Island, 3 great amusement parks with rides. And then I've chosen these measures: the cost to get in, the distance from home, the number of roller coasters that they have, the number of times that I've visited because I kind of like doing new things, and then also, is there a water park included? All right, so those are the measures or the criteria I'm going to use. And then I also gave myself 3 rows for each of those because I know, having been through this process, that there are a couple different steps that we're going to go through, from the data to the scaling and then to the final points for each one of these different criteria. So I gave myself 3 rows to work on. I've also given myself a column for best and worst because that's going to help me do the math. So the first thing to do is to gather the data for each of those. And here's the data. I know the cost for Cedar Point, $75 to get in. Michigan's Adventure is only $45. Kings Island's in the middle. I've got the distances. I did some research and find out how many roller coasters they all have. And then I've also included the number of times I've visited. I've only been to Kings Island twice, but I've been to Cedar Point 25 times. So, and Michigan's Adventure is kind of in the middle. And then Michigan's Adventure and Kings Island both have water parks, but Cedar Point doesn't have a water park that's included, right? I'd have to pay extra money for that. So the next step after that is to scale that data. All right, so to scale the data, first of all, sometimes high numbers are good, sometimes high numbers are bad, right? So I like the cost of Michigan's Adventure a lot better, so it should get the best number, but I like the number of roller coasters, a high number is better. And then water parks, those aren't numbers, so it doesn't really make sense, right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put the best one here, and I'm going to say equals, and then click on Michigan's Adventure because it has the best price. I'm going to do equals and click on the worst one, and then I'm going to use that when I do my my math for the scale. So I'm going to do equals for a formula, absolute value, because I don't want to worry about which one's higher or lower right now. I just want to do mine minus the worst one, right? So the farther from bad will be a higher number, right? If it's really close to bad, it'll be a low number. And then I'm going to divide that by the absolute value of the best one minus the worst one, right? So that makes sense. Cedar Point got a 0. It's the worst price. I'll do the same thing for Michigan's Adventure, equals absolute value of the score for this one minus the worst one divided by absolute value of the best one minus the worst one. All right, Michigan's Adventure gets a 1. It's the best price, the lowest number. And then I'll do equals Kings Island minus the worst one divided by the best one minus the worst one. And I made a mistake there. I messed up parentheses, divide. Let's try to fix that. So I need the absolute value of the best one minus the worst one divided by the absolute value. So that gives Kings Island a 0.73, right? Cedar Point is 0. Michigan's Adventure is 1. Kings Island 0.73. So now what we need to do is also figure out what's the best and worst for the rest of the categories. So the best one for distance, I would like it to be close to home. The worst one for distance, I would like it to be, I don't want it to be far from home. And then I'm going to change these numbers, get rid of my formatting. That's going to look better. And same thing here. The best one is the most roller coasters. The worst one is the least roller coasters. The best one is the least number of times because that's exciting to go somewhere new. The worst one is the most number of visits. Not as exciting. The best is to have a water park included. The worst is to not have a water park included. So now I can scale the rest of these like I did before, right? We're on step 2, scale the data. But this time I can copy and paste these formulas because I already have a formula that includes best and worst. I can just copy and paste the formula, right? Best is Cedar Point, worst is Kings Island. Michigan's Adventure is a little less than 0.5 because it's a little farther away. Best is Cedar Point, lots of roller coasters. Worst is Michigan's Adventure. Kind of in the middle is Kings Island. Best is Kings Island. Worst is Cedar Point. Kind of in the middle is Michigan's Adventure. Now for this one, there's no scaling to do. I'm going to pick numbers. No water park is bad. Free water park is good. So there's my scaling, right? All right. So next, I'm going to rank the different criteria. Right. So if I look at the most important to me, what I really want to do is go somewhere new. So I'm going to rank the number of times that I've visited, number 1. The number of roller coasters, number 2. And I'm going to keep going like that. Whoops, I put those in the wrong place. Let's try that again. The number of times I've visited is number 1. The number of roller coasters is number 2. I think the third most important is the cost. 4th is distance. And 5th is water park. So those are my rankings. All right. And that's totally different for everybody. Next, step 4 is to assign points. So the most important should get 100 points. It's the most important thing. The next most important is going to get 5 or 10 or 15 less than that. I think number of roller coasters, I'll give that a 90. I'm going to give cost a 80, distance 70, and water park included 60. And like I said, those could be anything you want. Just each one should be less than the one before because it's a little less important. All right, so that's ranking everything and assigning points. Right. The next step is going to be to assign some weights. And so here we're going to do some math. What we're going to do is add up all the points. So you can either do equals and then click on the first one, plus click on the second, plus click on the third, or you can use the sum function. Sum is the answer to an addition problem. So I'll do equals sum, parentheses, and then click on the first and drag down to the last one. It adds up to 400. There are 400 points, right? So to finish assigning the weights, I need to figure out how important is each thing compared to the total number of points. So if I do equals the 80 for the cost divided by 400 points, I can see that cost should get 20% of the score. If I click on the distance equals the distance divided by 400, I can see that distance is going to get 18% of the score. And I'll keep going like that. The roller coasters is going to get 23% of the score. number of times visited 25, and water park included is going to get 15% of the score. All right. So we'll keep going. So that's the weights. Next, we need to calculate the individual scores. So for the individual scores, it's going to be how good is something times how much of the weight that thing gets, right? So I'm going to do equals how good is Cedar Point at cost times how important is cost. I'll do how good is Michigan Adventure at cost times how important is the cost. And I'll do how good is Kings Island at cost times how important is cost. Right, so continuing that same all right, the same like taking the weighting for distance will come next, roller coasters after that. Here's another one where it's that same formula over and over. So I can copy that and put it in the next rows, and it'll do that math for me. Right, I can see that number of times I've visited Kings Island. Number of times I've visited is a quarter of the points. It gets a 0.25. Cedar Point gets a 0. Right, so I can keep going with the process. So I know how good each thing is. I know how important each thing is. I've multiplied to combine that together. The last step is to add it up and see how good each one of the amusement parks is. Right, so for that one, I'm going to add each of those last things that I just did. So I'm going to come up to Cedar Point equals the cost number plus the distance number plus the number of roller coasters plus the number of times I visited plus the water park. Cedar Point gets a 0.4, pretty good. A little less than half of my best thing, but not too bad. I'll do the same thing for Michigan's Adventure and Kings Island. Add those up together. And here's what I got for each of those. 0.62 when I add up the Michigan's Adventures. 0.69 when I add together the Kings Island, right? So then the last step is evaluate those results, right? Which one's the best? Kings Island gets a 0.69, right? Michigan's Adventure, 0.62, and Cedar Point, 0.40. Where should I go? I should go to Kings Island, right? And it turns out that the fact that it doesn't have quite as many roller coasters as Cedar Point, that it's a lot farther from Cedar Point, didn't really matter that much because those criteria aren't as important as number of times that I visited, and cost also helped a lot. Kings Island doesn't cost as much. So that's me going through the final project. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be here for office hours before school. You can stay on after to ask lunch. And this whole project will be due on the last Thursday, next Thursday, the first Thursday in November.